guest traffics in healthy spirits of a different sort. Ever wonder if your deceased loved ones are watching over you, trying to communicate from beyond the veil? Maybe they're trying to tell you, don't fall for him, he's only after your money, or I wouldn't order the tuna salad. Heather Carlucci is a psychic medium and medical intuitive who helps people communicate with the spirit world. We have so many questions. Heather, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
So tell me a little bit about what it is that you do. And I feel like there are a lot of words: clairvoyant, psychic, medium, medical intuitive. Tell me what it is exactly that you do.
Well, I do two things primarily. I am a psychic medium, which means I hear, see, and feel the spirits that will walk in with you or a client, as well as my own, and let them communicate. The other thing that I do is that I'm a medical intuitive, and for me it works very separately from each other.
Okay, and what does that mean, a medical intuitive?
I've always been able to sort of key in and with what's wrong with somebody who couldn't be diagnosed.
Wow. Okay, I want to get back to that, but
Okay.
let's start with the spiritual part. And you said that the spirits that people carry around with them, does everyone sort of have like spirits attached to them?
Everybody. Yeah, there's no such thing as really being alone.
And
when people are always like, is there anybody in here? And I'm like, always. There's just never, you're never not with an energy, a something. It's just the way it is.
So how should I think about these spirits who are attached to me? Are they the same spirits all the time? Are they the energies of people who I knew? Are they randoms?
Both.
Okay.
They're both randoms and people that you knew. There also can be people that were related to you in this life that are, that have passed even before you knew them. Great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, that sort of thing, as well as random, sort of just energies that are drawn to you for whatever reason.
How long have you had this ability to sense spiritual energy?
I was born this way. As long as I can remember, I've been able to hear, see it, and know what was wrong with people.
Were you scared by it? Like when you're a small child, or because you've always had it, it's just something...
It's scary. It was scary for me when I would walk into a house and it would be, for lack of a better word, haunted, because that's alarming. When I was around 9, we moved into our first big house, and that really, it was, a very old house, and that really sort of, I wondered what was wrong with myself for most of the time. But largely, it wasn't so much that I realized I had it when I realized that not everybody had it.
And when you talk about sensing this energy, do you hear it? Do you see it? What type of perception?
I all the above, pretty much. There's something called the 8 clairs, like clairvoyant, clairaudience, claircognizance, and it's full 8. I don't know them off the top of my head, but from what I can tell at this point, I've had or experienced all 8. So it sort of comes to me at this point, especially now that I'm doing this professionally, which is, as you know, sort of new. It comes to now. It's like a muscle that's being used. So now it just comes to me all the time.
Is that exhausting? Okay.
Yeah.
So you do this professionally, as you mentioned, but you didn't always. And
no.
So talk to me about that transition into embracing this as a profession.
Well, as you know, I was a chef and restaurateur of note it was going on 3 decades by the time I left. And when I left, it was time. I was a true kitchen person. I was a chef's chef, for sure. I lived and breathed it. It was every day. It was about being passionate about it. It was nothing about it I didn't adore until I didn't. And you can't do that job and be that person if you don't absolutely love every minute of it. And it came really fast. It was almost like the wall went down. It was like, now you have to do something else. My body couldn't take it. So a friend of mine sort of sat me down and had a big talking to me, being like, there's this other thing that you can do better than a lot of people. So, which seemed outlandish to me.
Why did it seem outlandish?
Try coming, it's another closet to come out of, guess what I do, and it wasn't as if my old position was really, I wasn't pushing pencils and paper in the corner in an office somewhere. I was pretty known for a long time in the food world, so it was really a matter of, posting it on Facebook and hitting click and keeping your fingers crossed, and who's going to think you're out of your mind.
Yeah, I know you socially, and we have friends in common, and I feel like this is only something that I knew about you fairly recently, before you decided to go pro, but that it wasn't something that you led with, that maybe you had to trust someone in order to tell them, hey, also, there's this other thing that I
definitely
do. So what has that been like, as you say, like coming out of the closet? And I imagine
it's actually called something. It's actually called the woo closet, which I just found out recently, which I thought was very funny.
That makes sense, coming out of the woo closet. Yeah, and also running your own business and having to brand yourself, and talk to me about some of the responses that you've gotten.
It's been interesting. As far as people in the food world, I get a big percentage of people who are like, that somehow oddly makes sense. People had worked with me for a long time that maybe didn't even know me that well personally. We had a lot of that. And then it's interesting. A lot of people, there's an interesting sect of people that are becoming of a certain age and are not that well and are getting scared about their own mortality. Are the first person to pick up the phone to call me for a reading.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Very, yeah.
So let's get to the medical intuitive part a little bit.
Sure.
So you are able to sense illness in people?
Yes. I mean, yeah, I guess in a nutshell, I am able to, yeah. And have been doing a lot of work most recently in the last year with a lot of doctors as well, which has been an amazing experience.
And do you have any medical training or background?
No. And I do not claim to have any. So let's just make that known right here.
So talk to me about how you work with doctors and with clients who may have some sort of ailment.
Usually people come to me if they can't find out something or a doctor can't figure something out. It's been only recently that doctors are a little bit more open to talking to somebody like me. And by and large, it's sort of a, I'm the date nobody wants to admit to going on, sort of. Mm-hmm. And I don't claim to know anything, but very often, just because of the way Western medicine works, we don't look at the bigger picture.
So this is not coming from a medical background or a knowledge of like anatomy. It's something that you are sensing in people's physical.
My biggest interest actually is, in my off hours, I'm always reading about anything medical, and I'm talking to the doctors that are open to talking, because I don't always know what it is I'm seeing. Mm-hmm. But if I explain something to them, they'll know what it is. And they'll say, you know what, great idea. Let me take a second look. It's not putting anybody at risk. It's just it's opening up the possibilities as to what they're not looking at.
Right.
And I think we have a lot of that just in Western medicine in general.
Do you ever face ethical quandaries about if you're sensing that someone is ill and
Yes.
What do you do?
A couple things. Other than take a deep breath. I lead them usually back to a health professional in the best way possible. I'm not somebody who has to give a diagnosis of anything extremely terminal. If I see it, it's also not for me really to tell.
Do you encounter similar challenges in your work as a psychic medium, where if there's a spirit that is like trying to contact someone, do they come through you? Like, do you have sort of I don't know. I'm just coming back to this issue of like, do you have ethical issues when you know something that somebody else doesn't, be that medical or like something that like is being conveyed to you by a spirit?
You mean like something dark?
Yeah, or not even necessarily dark. Like, if there's somebody who hasn't asked you to do a reading for them, but there's like a spirit that like is trying to tell them something. Do you go up to the person and you're like, hey, like, you may not believe this, but like, I've got a message for you and you need to hear it?
That rarely happens, but it does happen. Yes, and I often will. There is usually never something that's so detrimental that I feel like I have to sort of like walk into somebody's life out of nowhere. But if something comes through and I absolutely have to say it, I definitely feel out the situation before I walk up. A big thing about this work, you must check your ego at the door. There's nothing that needs to be delivered that needs to be crucial and delivered in a crucial way. Everything can be sort of given in a softer way and softer sort of communication. Mm-hmm. It is a very tender place. And when somebody comes for a reading, they're there because they do get sort of this, what somebody has called like divine attention. It is their hour. It is only for them. And as far as I'm concerned, it only has to do with them. I would say 75% of what I read, I never remember once it's out of my mouth.
Really?
I never remember it. I make sure everybody has to record everything when they have a reading with me, largely because people forget things and they remember them in different ways, whether it's how I say something, as we all do. But they must record it, and I really have to step away from everything that has to do with me, because you don't know who comes to see you. And if somebody comes to see you and you do this kind of work, they're really there for a reason. They're really there, and they really put their guard down. There's a lot of tears, inevitably, when I do a reading.
What do you say to people who are skeptical of this? And, you know, I'll say that I myself am not that spiritual or woo of a person, even though many of my friends are. I also acknowledge that there are things that, you know, we now acknowledge as science that 100 years ago people would have scoffed at.
Yeah.
You know, we couldn't see an atom before we could see an atom.
Right.
So what do you say to people who are skeptical of the work that you do?
Well, I will say across the board, and I say this to everybody about my work, I am not that woo-woo about anything. I am really, you know, I roll my eyes at half the things that come through the door that people are. And most of my friends are very spiritual, and I am not. You know, I'm pretty much a salty old New Yorker. Like, you know, like, this is my terrain, this is who I am. And I am a hardened believer in science. I believe everything that I do is attached to science. There is just a link that we don't know yet. The big step in believing, I find, with the work that I do, is when I call out illness. And they come back and they were like, you know what, you were right. You know, or I don't know anything about them, and I can tell them what's going on with them in the moment or how they feel that second. It's those moments, which really is just human connection.
Is it difficult for you then, as somebody who is a psychic medium and medical intuitive, who is not spiritual? And
I mean, I am spiritual, well, don't get me wrong. I very much am, but I think in sort of the more like public realm, the way people sort of deliver it, it's just not for me.
Right.
As you would say, starting a business and branding yourself, I can't do what's not me. You know, I couldn't do it in food, and I definitely can't do it in this. You know,
is it especially difficult then to see areas, I guess, of the more woo realm that you feel are exploitative of people, or, you know, where people are being taken advantage of by charlatans?
Yeah.
Are you like especially sensitive to that as somebody who, yeah?
Definitely. And anything I feel that is any taking of a culture, I have a very hard time with. You know, I think we live in New York. If we all don't borrow from each other, we don't do anything. But, you know, in every realm there is cultural appropriation.
Right.
And we're seeing it more and more in this. But I think there's also a very big difference between how you pay homage to something that you really respect. It's a big difference of cooking food that you're drawn to and sort of being open to what that culture has to say, and really sort of taking their cultural, spiritual rights. You know, that's RITE.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
I think there's a big difference between that.
Absolutely.
I think there's a very, you know, a different heaviness to it for sure.
Absolutely. Everybody who's doing sage ceremonies, I also think, should probably you know, think deeply about the appropriation of indigenous cultures.
Absolutely. I'm not a big sager, I have to tell you. It's not for me. It doesn't click for me.
Right. Thank you so much. Before we go, anything I should know?
Anything you should know?
Yeah.
I do a read every day on Instagram, so Heather Carlucci Medium.
Okay.
And, you know, come check out my website. There's all sorts of events and appearances and things, and, you know, I use a lot of curse words when I read, so...
And you also do in-person readings in New York. You do like group readings as well.
I do a monthly group reading, and yes, I have my appointment book is always open for person to person, and of course anything medical for sure. And also I'm very particular about people who sort of can't afford readings. That's why I sort of make sure there's always some sort of pro bono work going on, especially for people with medical issues.
Okay.
So yeah,
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks.